be riding up there. I'll be riding up there. If you miss me from the back of the bus, I'll be riding up there. This music for me was passed down through my grandmother, Beatrice Dobbin. When I was younger, my grandparents lived on Indian Camp Road, which still is there today. And they would take on Saturdays when I would go visit, they would take me to Smithfield. That was a big deal for my grandmother. We lived in Garner, North Carolina. And so when I visited my grandparents, it was important for my granddad to drive my grandmother to town. Well, when we would get it, of course, at that time, there were no safety belt laws. So I could sit in between my grandparents and we'd ride to town. That was a big deal. But when we went to town in Smithfield, there was a big bulletin board. And on that bulletin board, it said, "Welcome to KKK country." Well, I was pretty young at the time, and I truly didn't know what that meant. It wasn't until much later that I understood what that sign meant and what it was representing. But my grandmother would take me to Belk. At that time, it was on Main Street in Smithfield, because that was a big thing. It was important for her to show her granddaughter that, number one, they had the means, that she could take me to a department store to shop. Number two, it was a big deal because my grandfather was doing this, big thing. He had his own farm. Percy Flowers he would run moonshine or white corn liquor for him at night, but he couldn't face him on the street in the daytime to even acknowledge that he knew him because of segregation. But when we went to Belk, and I remember this one particular time, my grandmother was holding my hand pretty tightly, and we walked into the store. And first, one of the clerks looked at her, and they knew her. But what puzzled me so was that they called her by her first name. These women were younger, so I knew, even as a kid, that was a no-no. But they told her, they said, "Well, B, if you touch it, you better buy it." So I wasn't as upset or shocked by them making the remark. What upset me was that they called my grandmother by her first name. They didn't put a handle on it. So that was totally like, what? So after that situation, I remember her taking me by the hand, and then we're moving, getting out of the store. So as a kid, I'm thinking, now we're supposed to go get ice cream after this. But that moment, whatever occurred between her and that I was not really that attentive to, was upsetting to my grandmother, to the point that we went on back to the house. And in doing that, I remember specifically how that my grandmother was this kind of moment of, it was kind of quiet, but then she starts this, So I'm trying to figure out, what is that all about? This moaning, this groaning. So I wasn't, of course, at that time, I didn't really ask her because I didn't know where this was going. So it was much later on in life that I asked her what all that was about. And she would explain to me that in this world, you're going to be in situations where their words will not be able to really justify or really express what you feel. She said there'll be days that words cannot be uttered, and you may have to moan sometime. And she said, and also always remember that when you moan, the devil don't know what you're talking about. So I began to realize, okay, now I know who the devil is, right? The people at the department store, we got this. So, but in that, sharing these songs in those moments taught me a big lesson. And actually, that's how I came to know and to love them. Because she would sing songs, she would be humming, and then she would just out of nowhere, I don't feel no way come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me that this road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me.